Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 3. This is From Assessment to Action, Food System Reporting and Planning. I'm Natasha Pernica. I'm Executive Director of the Food Pantries for the Capital District, and I'm here moderating today. We have Amy Klein from Capital Roots joining us, as well as Kate McKenzie, Director of New York City Mayor's Office of Food Policy. So this discussion will focus on two distinct food plans, both so the food assessment for the greater capital region through Capital Roots and the food plan and food policy work done in New York City. So we're looking forward to hearing about the tools for planning, implementation, actions, and respective visions of a successful food system. So thanks for joining us today. As a reminder, feel free to put questions or thoughts in the comments area. We'd love to have participation from the audience participants here today as well. And I'm going to kick us off with some questions, but first I'll have the speakers just do a quick introduction for themselves. Their bios are in the Socio platform, but Amy, if you want to just give a few words about yourself, that would be wonderful. Oh, we'll unmute you. There we go.
You'd think we'd have the Zoom down, right? My name is Amy Klein, and I'm CEO at Capital Roots. I've been with the organization almost 25 years, and we're a 46-year-old nonprofit that focuses on the capital region of New York State to bring healthy food access to the communities in our region, and we do that primarily through a slate of programs that focuses on retail access for high quality food, fresh fruits and vegetables. And we launched the first mobile produce market in the country, the Veggie Mobile. And so I'm glad to be here.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. And Kate, if you can just share a few words.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a treat to be able to spend this next hour with you. My name is Kate McKenzie. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy here in the city. And I'm really eager to share with you some elements of our new Food Forward 10-year food policy plan, but also just a little bit about the office itself. The office was actually just codified into our city charter about 18 months ago. That makes the office itself permanent. And I think that's a great sort of governance step to underscore the importance of food and the food system. And I'm sure we'll dig into all of that. Over the course of the pandemic, my office worked very closely with many agencies to also make sure that all New Yorkers who are experiencing, access reductions to their food, either through a stay-at-home order, a pause order, or other challenges, we were providing meals delivered at home to them. We've also significantly invested in our emergency food system, undergirding that incredible network of which I hope many downstate pantries are in and participating on the summit today. I should just plug, I think there's some people from Cornell in here. I many years ago got my undergraduate degree in nutritional sciences from Cornell. So proud New York alum, Cornell alum here, and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Kate. All right. So I'm going to start today with our first question, which is, can you please share what prompted you to work on your assessment or planning project? And Kate, we can start with you.
Sure. So actually, exactly 2 years ago, I was while I was interviewing for this role, I actually started with in my interviews, the pitch of the city really needs to aggregate all of the work that's going on around food and should be happening around food into a consolidated and comprehensive plan. And so I had the energy and the get up and go to want to do that. And then that was only bolstered once I fortunately was offered the position. Our New York City Council had introduced legislation, and that was ultimately passed that required the bill itself, that required such a 10-year food policy plan to be written. So it was a good alignment of having some personal and committed passion in a city food policy plan, and then also the requirement of law to execute on that. And then, I think finally, and never more than over the course of the last year, have we realized just the interconnections that food has in all of our cities. And in particular, New York, it touches virtually every city agency. And so to look at a framework and to develop a framework that acknowledges that and sees and names those connections was incredibly important for us.
That's great, Kate. Thank you. And it sounds like you might have been one of the people to plant the seed to move that forward. And Amy, can you share what prompted you and Capital Roots to start on your assessment process?
Yeah, this was something that organizationally we've been interested in doing for well over a decade, but we didn't have the bandwidth to do it. But we really saw the importance of a comprehensive food system assessment, and the comprehensive nature of it was so important because there had been some neighborhood food assessments done, so a particular area, maybe even a citywide or a sector-wide, things done on the consumption side. But there was nothing that was done in our region that was regional in nature, that was a comprehensive look at our entire food system, production, consumption, processing, all of the pieces of our food system, and knowing how intertwined everything is, and understanding where the limitations, but more importantly, where the opportunities could exist. That's really why we wanted to take on this project and bring together all the pieces of those sectors to learn from each other and collaborate and help folks understand each sector. And then the other piece, we really wanted to do was challenge some of the long-held beliefs within each one of the sectors to determine whether the beliefs were true or whether they weren't, and if they weren't, what the truth was, so that we could determine or help leaders, whether they're policymakers or funders, identify where resources could be directed in our region to better serve our food system.
Can you give us some example of some of the beliefs that different sectors had, and what were some of the outcomes?
Yeah, so I'll give you one from production and I'll give you one from consumption. So on the production side, there has always been a belief that our producers, and this is the greater capital region, producers, and when I say greater capital region, it's the 11 counties of our region. So it's a pretty large area. If they took their product to market in the metro area, the New York City metro area, that they would earn more money for their products. And so we did studies of farmers who went to market in New York City. We looked at farmers who went mid-Hudson and farmers who were up in this region, who stayed in this region, to determine price point, volume, and then all the auxiliary costs associated with travel and time. And in fact, what we found was price point did not vary. And while volume might have varied, it also needed to be taken into consideration the time and the travel costs, which farmers weren't taking into consideration, as well as the vendor fees, which are considerably higher in the downstate markets. So that's one of those things that farmers need to truly assess before they make that decision to drive down to New York City to sell their product, whether truly they would be making any more money or whether it's better to stay in the upstate markets. On the consumption side, one of the things that we looked at was nutrition education. There's a lot of money that's spent on nutrition education, and it's based on the premise that low-income people using food pantries, don't know how to cook fresh fruits and vegetables, and they need to be shown how to do that. So we did focus groups and one-on-one interviews in food pantries all across the region, in both rural and in urban settings, to determine the veracity of that. And what we heard directly from those consumers is that they did not have trouble cooking good food. They knew how to cook good food. And in fact, 90% of the people reported that they knew how to cook good food. What they lacked was a significant enough food budget. They lacked the transportation, and in some cases, they lacked the tools that they needed, a working stove or pots and pans. And that's very important as we think about how we allocate our precious resources, whether it's from the government or private funders, or in fact ourselves, in terms of the community.
Great, thanks for those examples, Amy. And Amy, we'll stick with you as we go to the second question, which, how did you begin this project? How did you start?
Yeah, that was probably the toughest part, defining what the food shed was that we were going to research. We determined that our food shed was going to mirror the Governor's Economic Development Council region, so the 11 counties that were included in the Economic Development Council. But then we determined that we could not study for consumption and do a deep enough dive in those 11 counties. And so we restricted our consumption study to the 4 major counties of the Capital Region: Albany, Rensselaer, Schenectady, and Saratoga. So the 3 sectors of our study, production, processing, and distribution, are focused on the 11 counties from an economic development standpoint, and then from a building equity for low-income consumers standpoint, that's focused on the 4 counties. And we convened our steering committee, which was very important, of which Natasha was an important and critical member, and really looking at how we could bring together all sectors of the food system, which was really grounding in terms of having members of institutions from different sectors, really for the first time in many cases, talking to one another and understanding their challenges, from farmers to emergency food providers, developing what our mission and objectives were going to be, and then partnering with academic institutions and gathering our researchers, which we ended up having more than 60 student and community-based researchers for our community-based research efforts.
Wow, a lot of people involved. And switching back over to Kate, Kate, if you can talk a little bit about what prompted you to work on it, and how did you begin?
Sure. Actually, I was just thinking about this. We started the process of executing on this plan in January of 2020. So created an architecture of what we thought our goals would be, and how we were going to first obtain alignment amidst all of our city agencies, and then our stakeholder process. And then mid-March, we were put on a obviously heavy pause to divert to COVID. And, we very much could have probably taken a pass at, delaying the plan itself for at least a year. But obviously, food, from worker conditions to the supply of food, to the need for food, to how essential our grocery industry was. All of these things really put food front and center for all city agencies and all New Yorkers, that we didn't want to lose that opportunity. So in, I think it was in August of last year, we rolled up our sleeves and found the 25th hour of the day to be able to first articulate, the broad goals that would outline the framework for this plan, and, testing those. And I just want to discern a little bit of a difference in what I'm sensing between the city policy framework, really, and what I'm gathering Amy's product is, which is a true deep assessment. There's a little bit of a distinction between the two, and that this is our policy plan is really a roadmap and a framework to guide over the next 10 years. And I do expect that we will have very granular level assessments to advance many of the strategies within the plan. But neither here nor there. I would say, we really wanted to align on the policy goals that then were the architecture for the plan, and we could then fold in many of the the strategies and ideas that we had to advance those goals. So we had a little bit of a reset moment, but also really wanted to seize the opportunity of the fact that food was front and center, and release this plan on, certainly taking in many of the lessons we learned from COVID, but also acknowledging that, for the past 15, 20 years, food has been a big area of opportunity, with some missteps and with many advances that we wanted to capitalize on.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that distinction. And maybe, Amy, you want to speak to this too. But so if you're thinking about, Kate, yours is a policy plan, which is a roadmap, which then will help inform assessments. And Amy, you kind of started on the assessment side and now are working to put together some policy. So it's almost, I guess, there's benefits to approaching things in both ways. Kate, where do you think doing the policy piece first, how do you think that will inform your assessments and roadmap?
Yeah, so a very specific example. First, I think the framework and the way that it is, ideally it's for our city government to figure out how it's going to continue and really expand on our investments in food and why we need even more investments. So the benefit is that any city agency will find, at least 10 different opportunities for them within this framework. And so a very specific example, I'm sure you all experienced this too. We have a dearth of cold chain and cold chain storage, in particular in the city. So in this plan, you will see that called out, particularly in goal 3, which is about making sure that we have a very modern and efficient infrastructure system to support our supply chain. We don't go into the weeds about exactly how much square footage is needed and what kinds of products we'll be able to store in different parts of the city. But I do expect that in the very near term future, that's an opportunity as we find, specific actors and sectors and neighborhoods who can carry those plans forward, we'll be able to drill in and get very specific and concrete about.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Kate. And Amy, would you like to share a little bit about like your process and how kind of starting with the assessment and then moving to the policy side?
Yeah, and when we started the assessment with our steering committee, and we were taking the lead on this project, Capital Roots, but it was really meant to be a group effort, and we hadn't necessarily thought, Capital Roots, that we were going to come out of it with our own policy platform. One of the recommendations is that there be a regional food policy council that's developed, but frankly, we weren't even sure what our capacity would be as an organization to lead something like that, or if we would have capacity to do policy work. But after completing the assessment and really seeing how many action areas are not just needed, but really overlap, and there could be, I don't want to say easy action because none of this is easy. We decided to develop a policy and advocacy platform for the organization that we could partner with stakeholders that we have worked with through the assessment, and could move forward with many of these recommendations. And I think that's been a really helpful process, this assessment, to unearth not just the recommendations, but also these stakeholders.
Great, thank you. And so we'll move to our third question, which is what were the main findings or main takeaways? And Amy, we can go with you since you're up there.
Sure. So I mentioned, one of them on consumption in terms of nutrition education, and I just want to respond to a question that came up. Janine Jukowski, who was also a member of the planning group for our regional food system assessment, and she asked about the role that time plays for families, and that was definitely one of the four, I would say, issues that was raised. It was fourth in the pecking order. So first was money, second was transportation, third, and very much lower was kitchen tools, and then lower than that was time. But I think one of the things that we really walked away with an understanding of is that we should understand users of emergency food programs and or low-income people to be in line with the rest of the population in many ways. You know, we, except for things like transportation and money, we have the same struggles, right? We don't have enough time. We would like to cook better food, but we lack that time to be able to do that. So the other key elements on consumption that we researched and came away with is that most people who are using emergency food are actually buying most of their food. They reported 76% of their food being purchased from retail outlets. And, you know, the reason that's important is because the retail infrastructure in our region, and I'm sure it's very similar for many other regions, not just of our state, but of the country, is in need of improvement. And, you know, which is why we have food deserts and on and on. And so work really needs to be done on that retail infrastructure, whether it's mobile or whether it's permanent or a combination, to be able to support healthy food access for the population. And one of the things that we researched was what the retail infrastructure looks like in the greater capital region. And what we found was that it exists. The infrastructure exists, it needs improvement. And so what I mean by that is there are enough corner stores or chain small markets in every area of the greater capital region. They just need a distribution system, and they need other physical improvements to be able to serve the constituency and provide fresh, healthy food. So there's a lot of work to do there, but there's great opportunity for small distributors, for the small stores, and most importantly, for our low-income consumers. So on consumption, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, I would say, for on the retail sector. On production, we learned a lot of things about where the pinch points are for our producers, for small farms and small producers of, you know, non-produce producers. And we have a number of issues in our region related to lack of GAP certification, which stands for Good Agricultural Practice. We have very few GAP certified farms, and that creates tremendous limitations on what can be sold from our region to institutions like schools, hospitals, even smaller institutions that require these certifications. And so we have a lot of work to do in our region to help our farms get GAP certified, or to work with food hubs. We happen to be a food hub that can aggregate and broker those relationships. Another piece where you bring in processing is a lot of these institutions need processed food. Many of our schools don't have kitchens anymore, or daycare centers that need cut product. And if we want to be selling more local food, then they need to have it cut. And so we have to work in the processing infrastructure so that we can have local food processed for these institutions. And the other piece that we studied was distribution. And there's tremendous opportunity there too, because our distribution system here in the capital region is really based on small businesses. We are fortunate that most of our distributors are small family-run businesses, and they need our supports too to help them be able to ramp up and serve more with more local product. They currently are not. because of all the challenges with GAP certification, with the ins and outs of sourcing and providing local product. But this is where the questions of how we allocate both our public funding, our private funding, and all of our energies need to be viewed in terms of what is going to be good for building equity in our food system, building true food security for our consumers, and providing economic vitality for our producers.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And I know that's just some of the highlights, but it's a great rundown of some of the initiatives and things to come out of this. So Kate, would love to hear kind of where your main, I don't know that you have findings per se, but like your main policy areas or focuses and kind of where are you guys moving forward?
Yeah, I was going to take a little spin on the interpretation of that answer. So I will, and I want to also just lift up a lot of what Amy just mentioned as certainly acknowledged throughout our food plan, particularly as it comes to the need for processing food, like food manufacturing and processing within and across the state, to make sure again not all different types of sectors, whether it's retailers to large scale institutions such as schools and hospitals, can't take food in its whole form. And how we can create businesses and jobs across the state to be able to do that rather than transporting it out of the state only to return seems like such a ripe opportunity for us to take advantage of. When I think about the question of the findings, I would say I'm going to respond to a few of the process findings in creating such a robust plan. And for me, that comes down to understanding that there's just across, residents, even within government and across all other sectors, there's really just a lack of understanding how our food system works. And it is our responsibility, I think, to help connect some of those dots. And so how that will be expressed in this plan is a real commitment to transparency of our processes, of our data, and anything that we can share. I want to lean in with a yes. So in August, we hope a proof point of that will be we're a city that's actively participating in the Good Food Purchasing Program, which through that program helps us achieve many of the goals within the policy plan. But we're aiming to share as much data as we can about where this city spends, this year is an anomaly, but let's say on average $500 million in food. And how and where we're spending that money should be a statement of our values. And so that's our MO for participating in good food purchasing, but how we're able to showcase that in an accessible way for people who are curious, who are interested. We just want to lead with being much more transparent. We also want to be able to provide opportunities for community interests and stakeholders and residents and academic organizations to be involved in the articulation of our plan. So we've got something like 75 different ideas that we could execute on, but it's going to really need to be done both with a lot of different community partners, and we want to be able to give community partners some of the results of our own program so that they themselves can use those findings to advance their own real community level efforts. So the connection between sharing that sort of vicious circle of making sure that we're sharing information back to community groups so that they can use that information for things that they want to do and then report back when things are working or not working, and we can just constantly be supporting each other's outcomes when it comes to the achievements and the goals in these plans. I also think that, another sort of key finding for us just was how incredibly fragmented the city food system is. We are made up of tens of thousands of tiny, small businesses, many of whom, are really, really struggling right now, and many of whom have unfortunately shut down. So how we support our small businesses, our small food businesses, certainly restaurants and vendors, must be an important part of our of our city food policy, how we've gone, I would say, from a legacy of, importantly, concerned about feeding people to now embracing also really an attention to where that food is coming from, who is employing the people, what are the worker conditions like, and all of that is an expression of what the food policy for New York City should be. So I take some of those findings about the process and the real sticky points about how, and those are the motivating factors for wanting to do, the amplification of our plan in the coming years.
Thanks, Kate. And this is interesting because some of the things that I'm hearing both of you talk about, how important, we're here talking about hunger relief efforts, but really how important the retail, small business, small farmers, restaurants, I mean, that's where most of our food comes from, honestly, and that's a more dignified way of people accessing food is through the primary food system that we all use, so to speak, instead of pushing people into a secondary food system for the poor, so to speak. And I think that with the retail side of things and small business side of things, I'm hearing, how do we make sure that those businesses and farmers are successful? And some of the things that came to mind for me is having a resilient food system and that concept of food sovereignty a little bit and moving in a direction towards that. I think one of the first things when I started working at the food pantries 10 years ago, one of the first things I watched was A Place at the Table, the documentary, and something that really stuck with me was that the number 2 largest lobbying effort in the United States is the food manufacturing industry. They're right after the weapons manufacturing industry is the food manufacturing industry. And what both of you are talking about is really local, small business, retail, New York grown, and the importance of that and how do we come together to really advocate, to invest in this, because that's really one of the things that we saw with the pandemic was the breakdown in the supply chain. And
I think you're exactly right. And I think it is also about the fact that for many of those, of those workers, they are not seeing their wages increase. And so they are likely to be the beneficiaries of the emergency food system that we're all supporting. And so in order to really get to that different place, we've got to make sure that our most vulnerable workers, and, it needs to be, of course, named that many of the employed in those sectors are also immigrants, are also, incredibly challenged in their own right to be able to to make ends meet for a host of reasons. So, we're really, yes, it is about supporting small businesses for the sake of the economy, but also for the sake of those very same people are themselves very likely to be food insecure. The other thing that's important for me is to make sure that, we know, thanks to some research from supported by Robin Hood out of Columbia, that, when we consider food insecure New Yorkers, pre-pandemic, only about 1 in 4 were actually utilizing the emergency food assistance, the emergency food programs, soup kitchens and food pantries. So if we're only investing in that segment of the solution, then we're missing 75% of individuals. So I'm really keen to expand on programs that help meet people where they are, literally. Is it at a restaurant? Is it at a supermarket? Is it after work? And so to be, yes, supporting and undergirding the pantry system, but also making sure that people who make too much money to qualify for SNAP have an option that's available to them. And that is certainly a cornerstone that's embedded within goal number 1 of our policy framework.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Amy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things that we saw during the pandemic is, everyone on SNAP was given maximum benefits. And what we saw was that with those maximum benefits, people were able to buy more quality food. I mean, on our mobile markets, we saw the amount of food that people were buying, fruits and vegetables, skyrocket from the same people who were using their benefits previously. So we know that people need more benefits. And if we were able to do that during a pandemic to give maximum benefits, why are we not looking at doing that on the regular? That's one thing. That's something we all need to be advocating for, maximum SNAP benefits, so that people can have the dignity of choosing their own food. The other thing that, came out of the pandemic is the Nourish New York program, the governor's Nourish New York program. And, we wrote about that in our assessment because it happened, it was literally happening at the time. And our concern was that here's this great concept, here we're providing top quality fresh food through the emergency food system. And of course, people are loving it because it's top quality, as it should be. And farmers, they're getting paid for their product, as it should be, because they need to be paid for their product. But what happens after, right? So now the pandemic is winding down. Nourish New York was funded at least for another year, and I know there's a lot of talk about it continuing to be funded. There's a concept that serves both two sectors of the food system. One with top quality food, as it should be, and one with, a way to sell their product at a good price instead of being expected to give it away, which we have to stop looking to our small farmers to be giving food away. We have to stop having a handout for them, because they're often in need also. And I just want to follow up to what Kate was talking about in terms of both understanding our food system and the concept of transparency. Food systems are incredibly, incredibly difficult to understand. They are so complicated that, understanding how they work and how, you ultimately get food on the table we're so disconnected from our food system. The chains of food are so broken. And it's really important that we find a way to help educate people about our food system. And I loved the concept of transparency that you were talking about, Kate, because people throw around words like, local food. We hear it at supermarkets, we hear it at larger, big box stores. Oh, we're selling local food, and it's not true. And people need to be educated so they understand the food sourcing and they really know where their food is coming from, so they can be better educated consumers and also better supporters of our food system.
That's a great point. Thanks, Amy. And I think you were talking about maximum SNAP, which was important. One of the things, unfortunately, is that for the people who already had the maximum SNAP benefit, there wasn't as large of an increase. But good thing is that Farm Bill is under review right now. And one of the things they're looking at and is being proposed is moving the SNAP benefit level. Right now it's at thrifty food level, and there are conversations about bumping it up to the next highest level of food plans. So fingers crossed that hopefully we'll see some action in that area. So the last question we have today is kind of what are your next steps and actions from here? But also it'd be great if you have any advice for people wanting to take on something like this in their own community. Would also like to encourage folks to ask any questions or comments in the chat comment area. But Kate, how about we kick it to you for kind of your next steps, action items, and any advice that you would give folks?
Sure. So for us, we are hard at work getting ready to roll out some of our immediate sort of new food programs, specifically in the emergency food space. Our city budget should be released within this month. And I expect some new investments in emergency food and in some other like new food programs that I alluded to earlier, particularly around grocery stores and supporting the full spectrum of people who are food insecure. I also, I think we're all finally sort of breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief about the money made possible through the American Families Act and potentially, what might come in the form of an infrastructure bill to advance many of the strategies that we have articulated in our plan. So it's an area of just figuring out how to not bite off more than we can chew, literally pace ourselves. This is part of the lessons here a little bit about making sure that we can make good traction on some real sort of central and issues for us that are vitally important. And I think good food purchasing is certainly in that space, because it allows us to talk about feeding people the highest quality, most healthful food, also addressing the impacts of food and our environment, supporting our state partners and our regional economy. Again, the workforce is so central. I think that eventually we're going to be in a place then when we can get to where Amy is at looking at prototyping and developing some specific assessments to advance whether it's some larger capital projects or even some more more human service oriented programs to make it and to help us ensure that all people have access to affordable and culturally appropriate foods.
Great. Thanks, Kate. And how about you, Amy? Kind of next steps, action items from here?
I guess I'm off. We are investigating the creation of a food policy council for our region. We are, in conversation with policymakers and funders about how we can move these recommendations toward, to actualizing them for the community. We're about to hire a policy person to, help really move forward with these concepts. I think in terms of recommendations to others around the state or beyond, considering a project like this, considering doing an assessment, first I would say do a lot of reading. We researched a lot of assessments all around the country to determine the kind of assessment that we wanted to do, and we ended up merging two types of assessments to meet the needs of what we were trying to achieve, a community food assessment and an economic development assessment. So, I think that's really important. The other thing, just from a granular perspective, beyond assessment generally, I would say when we're looking for solutions, the greater we tend to have knee-jerk reactions to the latest and greatest, or what we think is the solution of the day. 10 years ago, it was farmers markets. Everybody wanted to have a farmers market, and they thought that was the solution. We should just have a farmers market in every single neighborhood, and that will solve the problem. And of course it can't, because there are only so many farmers and they can only do 1 or 2 farmers markets a week. And, that can't work. Now people are talking about having food hubs in every city. That's an absurdity. We don't need food hubs in every city. And, that is not the kind of infrastructure that is going to support a really robust food system. Aggregation points is something we should be looking at. But I guess what I would say is we really need to look at decisions before money is spent, whether it's government funds or whether it's private funds, that it's really being invested wisely and not at the, fad of the day.
That is true. We see a lot of that in the nonprofit sector, where there's a trend toward a cool new thing, or funders want to fund the new thing, when really we need to look at the assessments and the reports, and it's not always going to be a quick win. Some of these things are going to take years to accomplish, to move in sustainable solutions that are the right way to actually solve the problem. So definitely. Yeah. There is a question from Sonia: how much time and money resources did it take to complete your assessment? Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about the time, money, resources, what it took to do it?
Yeah. So this was supposed to be a 2-year project. It took us 4 years. We had 1 full-time staff person who led the assessment, and I spent way too much time on it. A lot of my time went to it. I would say we probably spent, at least $60,000 a year on it in those 4 years, and we got almost no funding for it. We probably got each year like $20,000. So we self-funded almost the entire assessment.
What were some of the challenges or pushback from funders that you were hearing in regards to investing in this kind of project?
I just don't think they understood it, to be honest. I think, I think as time marches on, funders understand more. So I think we're in a better place today than we were 5 years ago or 6 years ago when we started this process. The same as when we started our mobile market, the Vegemobile, like people were like, what are you talking about? Like the idea of putting a truck on the road and selling fruits and vegetables. And now, of course, there are many around the country, and it's like, well, yeah, so it's hard to be on the front end of that. And, again, our food system is very complicated, and it's just challenging to be, at that side, on that end of things.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. And then Kate, from your side, how much time, money, resources are you all investing in your project and process?
Sure. So to complete the plan itself, I was able to repurpose some private dollars that we had, a very modest amount, I think $75,000 or $80,000, and really leaned on my incredible team here, my colleague Mandu Sen especially, to do a lot of the synthesis work of inputs from 25 different city agencies. All in, we had more than 110 city employees review, vet, or provide input at some point in time. The consultant firm that we did hire through an RFP process really helped us to with the stakeholder engagement element. We were able to have both sort of in-depth workshops for key expert stakeholders, and then an additional series of briefings for community stakeholders. So managing that process, again, all Zooms, all like this, which full well now, was a heavy lift. But all in, I mean, it was quick. We started really in earnest in August of last year and wrapped up mid-December.
Wow, that sounds intense.
Yeah.
Amy, did you want to add?
Yeah, I forgot to mention how much volunteer effort went into this. I mean, our steering committee put hours and hours and hours and hours of their time pro bono into this. Our researchers, as I mentioned, we had more than 60 researchers literally on the ground, surveying stores, doing focus groups, all kinds of things. So we couldn't have done this without the in-kind support that we got from the community. And, I think the value of that, we haven't added it up, but, it made it happen.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of people to coordinate to get these projects and processes going. It's a lot. It's overwhelming to think about, but we just have a couple more minutes. And Amy and Kate, I really appreciate your time sharing both of these incredible projects. Is there anything else that you'd like to share or takeaways you'd love for people to know before we close out our session today?
It's worth doing.
It's worth doing. It's also, I think, Amy, it was you that mentioned, like, no need to recreate the wheel. Like, there are, whether it's both in this country, but also abroad, there are many stellar examples that are themselves set up to be templates. And so I just really encourage people to really utilize what's around.
That's great. I really appreciate that. And what is it? Just do it. It's worth it. Is that the takeaway? And I believe that Susan Zimmett from the state is hoping that more communities will also embark on assessments and planning and kind of roll up into a statewide roll down or roll up. Not sure which way we can do this because each community and geographic area is unique in New York State, but we all are still dealing with the same challenges in our broken food system. So again, Kate and Amy, thank you so much. Oh, there is one comment in the chat. Sonia said, "Where can we find the assessments that you've done?" Let's see, Amy and Kate, do either of you have links or things that we could stick in the?
I can't type in the chat, but it's nyc.gov/foodforward.
nyc.gov/foodforward. I can't comment in the chat either. This platform's crazy. Okay, and wondering.
Oh yeah, I can't put it in the chat, but
Here, I'm going to go over to the.
if you go to our website, which is capitalroots.org, and you go to the resources tab, our food assessment is in there. And also you'll see the links to all of the 17 research reports. So the executive summary is there and all of the links to the research reports if you really want some heavy summer reading.
Great. And actually, I'll thank Janine and Daniel for putting the links in the comment chat area for us. Thank you. We're not able to access it from this side of the house. So thank you so much. And again, thank you, Kate and Amy, for spending some time with us today and for all the participants, and keep the conversations going forward from here. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the next session that starts at 3.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.